Can officers smoke marijuana off-duty? This is one of the ongoing issues that we see throughout the country as the legalization of marijuana is coming about. There are cases out of New Jersey that is starting to shape how we see this topic being discussed in our agencies. Now, before we touch upon those, we have to reiterate that if legalization of marijuana is happening in your state, make sure you have clear policies that outline what your officers should be doing and what is reasonable. We also have to remember that legalization of marijuana is not throughout the United States. Federally, it is still not legal. Take that into account when you're creating your policies or when you're watching this video. One of the cases we are going to look at is Patton. This is out of New Jersey. This is where the removal or termination of the officer was upheld. The officer tested positive for cannabis, the use of off-duty marijuana. But in this case, they weren't really questioning the issue of the use alone. They were looking at marijuana and how it was purchased. And in this case, it was purchased from an unlicensed source. So the source matters in this case. This is also reflected in Lopez, also out of New Jersey. In this situation, Lopez also couldn't verify where the source of marijuana came from. So here it was also an unregulated source, and in that case, his termination was also upheld at the appellate division. Now, where the source came from, where the marijuana came from, that is always going to be called into question when we're looking at these cases. But we also have to look at timing. If you're part of a state that is moving towards the legalization of marijuana, your officers have to remember that they have to wait until that law comes into play. That law has to be in effect prior to them utilizing that marijuana. In this case, out of New Jersey, a sheriff's officer tested positive before the recreational cannabis protections applied. In this case, the court found that his removal was upheld because the officer knew the use was illegal at the time. So not only the source, but timing is going to matter. Now let's take a look at reinstatement, because in certain situations, officers are terminated because of the lawful use of off-duty marijuana. In these cases, officers lawfully utilized marijuana. It was off-duty. The source was never called into question, but yet they were still terminated for that usage. They had a positive test on a drug test at work. There was no claim of on-duty use. There was no claim of impairment while on duty. There was no claim of an unregulated purchase. Here, the court upheld reinstating this officer. This officer got his job back. Here, the court upheld reinstatement because the law protected lawful off-duty regulated use. Now, there were other cases that reinforce the lawful use of cannabis. Bottom line, in New Jersey and in certain states where legalization is a protection or legalization of marijuana is allowed, the strongest reinstatement cases involve lawful regulated use. Here, termination is considered unreasonable if the officer has used the cannabis, used the marijuana off duty. But what about other states? Let's take a look at Florida. In this situation, a corrections officer was utilizing medical marijuana to help with PTSD. He was terminated because the agency said that he could not lawfully possess a firearm because of federal firearm statutes. In this case, the Florida courts went completely opposite of what New Jersey is moving. So this is going to be the pain point for law enforcement as we move forward with this topic. We have federal law that conflicts with your state protections. Where do we go from here? Now we need to start looking at federal case law. One of the clearest that are out there has to do with Shea versus the state of New Jersey. In this situation, the city argued that the federal firearms laws conflicted with New Jersey cannabis employment protections. Here, the court simply said an employee may not be fired simply for lawful off-duty use of cannabis. So here we start to see the federal courts are starting to move more in favor of the legalization of it. But we can't rely on that one case specifically. There are other cases that are currently going on in the federal courts that we need to watch. The bottom line for law enforcement is that the most important federal cases to watch are these firearms cases. These are going to shape how agencies analyze whether an officer who utilizes cannabis can lawfully possess and carry a firearm. But where do we go from here? Reasonableness. Your officers deserve the same standard that our citizens do on the street. We need to lead with reasonableness. Remove any supervisory bias. The same standard has to apply for all officers in your agency. So what you do for one officer, you must do for all. The simple way to do that is if you have legalization in your state, or if legalization is coming, make sure your policy accurately reflects what your officers can and cannot do. Make sure it reflects reasonableness in your standards. Whatever your personal opinion may be about whether officers should or shouldn't utilize it, it is being shaped right now through the courts. Follow those trends and be reasonable with your officers. Remember, consistency, documentation, and fairness. This is going to be how your agency gets through this difficult paradigm shift as we move forward with the legalization of marijuana throughout the country.